Hello and welcome to the Savage Stream, where I live stream coming to you live every single Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, where we just have a good chat about Star Trek. I am your host, Charisse, the Sci-Fi Savage, and today we are going to be talking about the best top 10 episodes starring Data from Star Trek The Next Generation, at least according to me. Now, there are a lot of episodes that are starring Data. There are at least 20, I think maybe 25 or so out of 178 that do focus primarily on the character of Data. But I want to focus in on the top 10 episodes that I think are just the best, either representations of who he is as a character or cool story arcs that we get to see Data play in. So let's get started. We're going to start with episode number 10, Measure of a Man. And that is season 2, episode 9. In Measure of a Man, Data has to kind of fight for his right to be considered sentient. So here's the breakdown of that. In this episode, this guy named Commander Maddox comes on board the Enterprise and he's like, hey, I'm the leading cyberneticist in Starfleet or something, and I want to study Data's brain. I want to understand how it works. I want to kind of know how he ticks. So I'm going to take apart his brain and check it out and see if I can replicate that. To which Data responds, I think that's a terrible idea. You don't know enough about my brain to put me back together properly. So I'm going to pass on that. Maddox says, you can't pass on that because I'm a commander and I think he's a lieutenant or something. Anyways, he outranks Data. So he says, you are ordered to report to, where is he at? The Daystrom Institute, I think is where he works, but I'm not totally sure. Anyways, he says, you're ordered to report to my office so I can take apart your brain and see how you work. And Data's like, well, now I'm kind of in a pickle because I really don't want to do this, but it's an order. And Picard says, you know what, if you don't want to follow that order, if you are unwilling to follow it, maybe you need to resign your commission. You need to quit Starfleet. So even though it breaks Data's heart, he's like, all right, I resign my commission. So Maddox says, no, you don't. You can't resign your commission because you are not a person. You are a thing and you are the property of Starfleet. And since you are property, I order you again to show up to my office so that I can pull apart your brain and see how it works. Hence, the episode ensues. So now the question is, does Data have any rights, or is he really just a thing? Is he really a piece of property? So they're on a space station at the time, and the head of the space station decides to arbitrate this. For some reason, that's her job. So she becomes the judge, and Maddox is on one side with Riker being appointed as the prosecutor, and then Data's on the other side with, I guess, Picard as his defense. And so they're doing this court case to see, is Data really sentient? And basically at the end, Data meets 2 of the 3 of Maddox's qualifications, with the exception being consciousness. And that's because there's no way for them to measure consciousness. So Picard makes the argument, if you can show me how to measure consciousness in us, in me, in you, Maddox, then we can measure it in Data and see if he's conscious. But since no one's able to do that, the arbiter, the judge, says, that's a fair point. Like, we can't say he's not conscious any more than we can say we are conscious. So, and she said, I don't think anyone can say that. So we're going to grant Data his rights as an individual. Maddox, surprisingly, does not go off at a huff, which is surprising because he's been huffing and puffing this whole entire episode. Instead, Maddox is like, all right, you know what? That's fair. And for the first time in the entire episode, he refers to Data as he instead of it. And he's like, all right, Data, like, I respect you as an individual. I guess I'm going to have to leave. And Data, to his credit, holds no hard feelings, primarily because Data has no feelings. And he's like, look, I would love to help you with your work because I want to understand my brain better also. But why don't you do a little more research, learn a little bit more about Dr. Soong's work, and then I'll be willing to help you later on down the line, which I think is pretty dope. Like, he could have approached it that way from the beginning. Or as soon as Data was like, no, I'm not going with you, he could have approached it that way then and said, you know what, let's work together. But he didn't. But Data gave him that opportunity. Now, if we fast forward all the way to Picard, which this is not about, this is about the Next Generation. But if we fast forward to Picard, Maddox comes back. The idea of kind of enslaving androids comes back, and kind of this entire episode is overthrown. So sad, Picard. And that happens a couple times in that show where kind of big things that are important in canon are just overthrown. But at this moment, it's a victory. So we're going to call it a win. All right, episode number 9 on the list is The Quality of Life, which is season 6, episode 9. So in The Quality of Life, this episode is when Data discovers that these little robots that were designed to be tools to help to help, I want to say repair the ship, but they weren't repairing a ship. They worked on a space station, and the space station was creating a particle fountain. What is that? I don't know. But it's supposed to be super important and going to be groundbreaking, and the head scientist wanted Starfleet to use this technology. So she's trying to work at this breakneck pace to make sure the fountain all works and everything's great, but there's all these problems with the fountain. So she created these little robots, these little machines called exocomps that can just like get into little nooks and crannies inside of Jeffries tubes and stuff where people can't go, and it can fix all kinds of problems. They have heuristic learning, heuristic algorithms, which means they can learn from their past mistakes. And they have these really cool like Swiss Army knife hands or like projectiles from their little bodies that can turn into whatever tools needed. So depending on the problem, it'll turn into like a screwdriver or a hammer, but space screwdriver and space hammer. So there's these little robots that are roaming around trying to save the ship until at one point when Starfleet comes to see how far along this technology is getting and Data happens to be there, one of the exocomps is ordered to go into a little Jeffries tube and fix something, but the exocomp comes back out and they're like, what the heck is wrong with it? So they're messing with the controls, like get back in there, and it won't listen to any of the controls. And they're like, what the heck is wrong? And then that Jeffries tube explodes like seconds later. So Data goes, I think these robots are alive. Like, I think they're sentient. And that was self-preservation right there. And the lead scientist, her name is Dr. Farallon. She's like, you're crazy. They're just tools. They're not real. They can't be sentient. They're robots. I built them. They're tools. And Data's like, wait, that sounds familiar. Do you know Maddox? Actually, he doesn't say that, but he should have said that because she was singing the same tune. Anyway, come to find out that the exocomps, this happens often where the exocomps will not take an order, will not take a command. And then when you kind of open them up, they have all these new pathways, like neural pathways inside the machine that weren't there before. And Dr. Farallon says, well, whenever this happens, we just, the robot will no longer listen to us. So we have to erase its entire memory and kind of reset it and start over. And Data's like, if they are sentient, you're kind of destroying them. And then every time they reach sentient, you're destroying them again. So anyways, big fight, big argument. Can't decide who's right or wrong until something terrible happens on the space station where the particle fountain, something, it's like going to explode or something like that. So everyone's evacuating, except for Picard and Geordi. They get trapped on the space station when it's like about to explode. So it's just them and a handful of exocomps. Everyone else is back on the planet. And Data is kind of like trying to figure out what to do in the scenario. And for some reason, they can't beam out because who knows what, radiation, ions, whatever. And Data's like, why don't you ask the exocomps to help? Like, just tell them the situation because they keep trying to order the exocomps to do all these things and the exocomps aren't listening. And Data's like, just ask them to help you. So they're like, all right, exocomps, can you help us? And the exocomps kind of like form this little shape and they like go beep, 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 beep between each other and they come up with some kind of solution. Then they all fly to where the particle fountain beam is like about to become unstable or whatever. They stabilize it long enough for Picard and Geordi to beam out. 3 of the exocomps are beamed out and the 4th one stays behind to keep the particle beam stabilized. And then it's like blown up. So, which is super sad. So Data's like, look, not only did they solve the problem, but they were willing to sacrifice themselves for others if given the chance, right? They were not willing when they were ordered to do it, to just do it, but they were willing to sacrifice when it was a choice, which is just such an interesting idea, right? So if we think about artificial life and life becoming sentient, like it wasn't made to be sentient. It was made to be a Swiss Army knife. It was made to be a tool, but it starts to become kind of self-aware and wanting to preserve itself and apparently preserve other life. That's really incredible. Like that's a really big leap of logic and values, if that can even be applied to this scenario. Anyways, so at the end of the episode, the head lead scientist, Dr. Farallon, is like, all right, I won't admit that the exocomps are sentient. I'm still not ready to say that, but something weird did happen. And I'm going to agree to not mistreat them anymore, or at least to not treat them like tools. I won't treat them as simple tools. Like I will still use them for their main function, but she didn't say this part, but I'm guessing what was unsaid is that she will not, like if they start doing their own thing and they don't want to get blown up or whatever, she won't rewrite them or erase them, is what I'm guessing that means. We never get a Where Are They Now with the exocomps in Star Trek The Next Generation. This is a one-off episode, like almost all the episodes. Like 90% of the episodes, we don't find out what happens to them next. However, in Lower Decks, which is an animated series of Star Trek, we do get to see the exocomps again, and we get to meet one of them specifically who's like really saucy. And it's just so fun that they brought them back because like I always wondered what happened to these robots, right? Apparently they joined Starfleet. I don't know. Hello, everyone joining live. Hello, everyone who is joining on the replay. We are on episode number 9 out of 10, which is quality of life. That's what we just finished. So number 10 was Measure of a Man. Number 9 was quality of life. Number 8 is called The Most Toys. This is season 3, episode 22. And this is just a classic Data episode. So in this episode, Data is kidnapped by a man named Kivas Fajo. And Kivas Fajo is a collector. He collects rare and valuable things from all over the galaxy, not legally ever, right? So it's always like think of like the last eagle in all of America or something like that. Fajo would collect that eagle and keep it in a little cage and like feed it little food just so it can stay barely alive, just to show his rich friends what he has. So Fajo's a bad guy. He's very much a bad guy. And he does this elaborate ruse to convince the Enterprise that Data blew up on a shuttle, that it was some kind of user error and he pushed the wrong button or something like that. And the shuttle exploded and they needed to move on. So the Enterprise believes this and they do move on, except for Geordi and Wesley. Geordi is just like, that user error just doesn't sound like Data. Something fishy is going on, and he keeps pushing until they find the truth. Now, on Data's side, he finds himself in this cage. They kind of reactivate him, and he's like, what the heck, dude? Like, you can't kidnap me. I'm a sentient being. Didn't you see Measure of a Man? I've got all these rules and, rights and stuff like that. You cannot keep me in a cage. And Fajo's like, pretty sure I can. Look at all these cages. I can keep anything I want. So Data's like, I'm not going to participate. If you want me to sit here, because he wanted him to sit in a chair and just kind of be an interactive artifact or something in his little museum in his gallery. And so Data's like, no, I will not participate in any way, shape, or form as long as you hold me against my will. So Fajo goes, really? Bet you will. And he brings in his assistant. I think her name is, I want to say Valerie, but that's not it. It's Varia. His assistant Varia, who is really a bad guy also. She was the one who literally kidnapped Data when everyone's back was turned, and she rigged the shuttle to explode in the first place. So he calls in Varia, and you're thinking that Varia is going to be like, oh, Data, you better do it or else. But that's not what happens. What happens is Fajo pulls out a very rare collector's item weapon, some kind of disruptor that was banned from its sector where it was designed at because of the painful way that it extinguishes life. Like, it is basically a handheld war crime. He points it at Varia, and he's like, all right, Data, do what I said, sit in the chair, or Varia gets it. And Varia's like, wait, what? I thought we were on the same side, but no, they were not on the same side. So Data's like, all right, fine. So he agrees to play along. Now, Varia is his assistant and is his partner in crime. However, she was also captured by him at some point. She gives a little bit of backstory. Later on, she comes to kind of rescue Data, do a little jailbreak. And she's like, look, I'm trapped here just as much as you, but maybe we can get away together, because now seeing what he just pulled on me, I don't feel safe. Not that I ever felt safe, but I really don't feel safe. And here's the interesting thing. If you watch this episode, which I highly recommend because it's a really good one, Varia's kind of her alien makeup is really weird. It almost looks like her face is kind of melted and like lumpy and square. And she says that was a punishment from Fajo for something she did in the past, that he like poured acid on her or something, because he does pour acid on Data earlier in this episode. So she's like, she says something like his generosity is like famous or something like that. And then she's like, and his wrath is equally famous or something she says. So you're like, okay, girl, get out of there. Get out of there. So she pushes in the little code or whatever, deactivates the force field, opens the super strong door that even Data can't break through. And they're running to the shuttle bay to get in a shuttle. But unfortunately, somehow, don't know how, Fajo was alerted that this was going to happen. So he shows up with the major disruptor in his hand, and he's like, nice try, Varia, and blasts her. And you just see her like scream and then kind of turn into two pieces and disintegrate. And you're like, oh, what did he just really do that? Like, and he did it. And the crazy thing, so this scene is acted by an actor named oh my gosh, Ruben, I'm blanking on his name, it's gonna come to me. Anyways, he's amazing. He's amazing. And the way he acts this scene is like, he just takes so much pleasure in destroying his assistant because he's sick and twisted and a psychopath. And he kind of turns the tables on Data. Data's fighting off guards left and right or whatever, and ends up with the disruptor in his own hand. And maybe he takes it from Fajo or something, but at some point Fajo's disarmed and Data has the disruptor. And Fajo's like, you're not going to do anything. And Data's like, don't be so sure. But Fajo's like, first of all, you're programmed not to harm life, like not to harm human life. And you have no emotions. And if you have no emotions, that means you cannot be motivated by revenge. So therefore, I think I'm safe. Like, this is an empty threat. You're holding that weapon on me and it's a totally empty threat. But how wrong he was. Data's like, actually, it's only logical to get rid of you because you are a terrible person and you will never stop. There's nothing I can do to make you stop other than shoot you with this disruptor. There's no talking. There's no, politicking. There's no, like, you have to end. So he goes to fire the disruptor. But at that exact moment, the Enterprise shows up because they've kind of backtracked to figure out where Data must be. They show up and they beam the two of them to the transporter room at that exact moment. And there's something about transporter technology where it can disable all weapons, which is handy. So you can't beam in and they just start firing away. So when they land or when they appear, the disruptor's been disabled. And Riker's like, wait, that was weird. I think it's O'Brien or something who's like, hey, there's some kind of phaser fire inside of the transporter beam. So it's like the second he fired, he was transported and the beam was dissipated and the disruptor was turned off. So they're like, Data, are we crazy? Or was there phaser fire when we transported you? And Data's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And just like walks away coolly. So they arrest Fajo and they return all of his stolen goods to its rightful owners. And at the end, Data comes to see Fajo, and Fajo's like, yeah, I bet you love seeing me in this little cage, don't you? And Data's like, no, I have no emotions, remember? So doesn't matter to me. But as the viewer, it's like a really satisfying moment where we also do not get a where are they now, because apparently he's going to be arrested, face charges, something from who we don't know. So I picked this episode as one of the best Data episodes, not only because it really shows, not only because it's obviously about Data, it's like centralized on him, but it shows his resourcefulness, right? What he's willing to do to escape and get his sentience or get his rights kind of appreciated, or, to be his own person, to be independent. Also, we get to see his values, right? The way he values life and what he's willing to do and not willing to do to protect that life. So amazing episode, highly recommend. All right, let's move on to episode number 7 on the list out of 10. And this is called Redemption. Specifically, I'm going to talk about Redemption Part 2. And this is season 5, episode 1. So in the episode Redemption, this is where there is a Klingon civil war going on. The Duras sisters are trying to overthrow Gowron, and which is a theme that keeps coming up over and over. But turns out that this whole entire plot is actually not a Klingon plot at all, but it's all being puppeteered from Selah, who is Tasha Yar's half Romulan daughter. Long story. So Selah and the rest of the Romulans have this plan to overthrow the Klingon government, to install a puppet government, so that way they can come against the Federation with more force. Because I guess Klingons are allied with the Federation, but not members of the Federation. I don't know. If you know the answer, let me know in the comments, because I never really understood that in the TNG era, what the relationship was. Anyways, so during this whole thing, they set up this big net between like Romulan space and Klingon space. The Federation does, because they know that the Romulans have an armada ready to jump in and go to war. But they know that in their minds, they know it in their hearts, but they don't know it for real, because those ships can cloak and Starfleet ships cannot. So Starfleet brings a whole bunch of ships, and there's kind of like this space net, and there's the Romulan armada on this side and the Federation armada on that side. So once they're gearing up for a potential war, Picard's like doling out all the, number 1, you're in charge of this ship, and so you're in charge of that ship. And he skips over Data, and Data's like, I'm the second officer. Shouldn't I be in charge of a ship? And Picard's like, okay, but he had reservations, but he won't tell Data what those reservations are. So he's like, all right, I'm going to put you in charge of the Sutherland. So Data takes over the Sutherland, and there's back and forth and cat and mouse. At one point, Worf gets kidnapped. It's a really good episode. It's a really good two-parter episodes. Picard meets Sayla and is like, oh my gosh, you look exactly like Tasha Yar. And we get the whole backstory of how she was created and what happened to Tasha and all these things. But anyways, going back to Data, when he's in charge of this ship, his first officer despises him and really fights him on everything, argues with him about everything, because he says, you're a machine. One, you're a machine, so I don't trust you. But two, since you're a machine, how could you possibly value human life? The things that could hurt us can't hurt you. So therefore, you must not care about hurting us. You must not care about us at all, which is so unfair. But that's what he believes, and that's what he proposes. Like, that's what he promotes to everybody else, and he's seeding all these seeds of doubt and stuff. So in the end, Data devises this ingenious way to uncover the Romulan cloaked ships just as they're passing through the space net. Picard gives an order to the Armada to regroup and meet at some place. And Data's like, wait, I have an idea. So instead of following that order, he starts giving other people on his ship orders to uncover the Romulan cloaked ships. So he's like, so-and-so, do this, do that, retool the torpedoes, da-da-da-da. His first officer the whole time is just like, what? Why should we do that? I don't want to do that. That's a stupid idea. Didn't you hear what Picard said? We need to go. You're not following orders. I mean, he's just like back and forth, back and forth. Data has to be like, do what I said or I will relieve you of duty like 6 times. He's like, do it. Do what I said. Like, fire this guy already. Like, this is not working. But he keeps being like, just do it. Do it. Do what I said. Fire the torpedoes. Do what I said. When he finally listens to everything that Data's telling him, the torpedoes explode and they kind of reveal where the Romulan ships are. And so it's like, boom, we got you. We know exactly where you are. We know how to find you. We know what you're working on. You cannot go and resupply the Duras sisters with more weapons to win this war. So the Duras sisters are on their own. The Klingon Civil War is about to be put to bed, and y'all need to go. So as soon as Sayla realizes their cover's blown, she's like, dang it. We lost. Let's go back to Romulan space. So she turns to leave, and Data has saved the day. So now his first officer, who's been talking all this trash this whole time, is like, all right, I guess I was right. So Data's like, okay, now that we've done that, now do XYZ. Because he had said, if we do that, it's going to flood 3 decks with radiation. And Data's like, that's fine. We'll fix that later. And he replies with, see, you don't care about human life because you don't care if these humans get irradiated and all these things. So now that it's the proper time, he goes, hey, go clean up that radiation and go do this and go do that. Everything that the guy was complaining about, now he's on board with it now that he saved the day. So I love this episode because I love seeing Data kind of push back. And also, I think it's so relatable, right? We've all been in a case where there's somebody who maybe has authority over us and they're not listening to us when we have good ideas, and it's so frustrating. But I don't know if we've all been in that position where we're in a position of authority and someone's not listening to us and we know what's best and they're not listening, and it's really frustrating as well. Maybe if you're a parent or have ever seen a kid or known a kid, maybe you could relate to that, where it's like, I am telling you, you need to sleep. If you don't sleep, you are going to be cranky and not love your day or love your life. And they're like, I don't want to sleep. It's just like this back and forth thing. And you're like, trust me, I've been here before. Sleep is important. Anyways, love this episode. I love seeing Data stand up for himself. And I love the fact that he saved the day. Yeah, that first officer was, it's painful to watch. Like, those scenes are actually painful. Okay, episode number 6 on the list is Masks, and that is season 7, episode 17. So in this episode, Data becomes an entire civilization. They encounter this asteroid that is just covered in ice, so they melt it, and inside there's this huge ancient structure. It's unclear whether it has its own propulsion or it's just been jettisoned from a planet or something and it's just been floating for thousands of years. So we don't know how it got into space, but it's been in space for a while. So long that it accumulated that entire, cloud of ice all around it. So this ancient artifact is actually like a library that represents this culture that's long gone. Everything about this culture, and especially their kind of like religious like beliefs and mythology, is wrapped up inside of this artifact, which is so cool. So anyways, Data ends up getting downloads from this thing. The entire ship gets downloads from this thing, including Data. So the ship starts being transformed. Like, this part turns into like a marsh or a bay or like just different parts of the civilization. And Data starts becoming the civilization. So you see him go through what appears to be dissociative identity disorder or multiple personality disorder, where he's like different people he's different people over time. But it's so interesting because he has different mannerisms and different voices and different memories and different fears and different beliefs with each person he transforms into. Ultimately, he transforms into the deity of these people. And these people have two deities. They have one Masaka and then one Korgano. So he transforms into Masaka, who's basically like the sun god, and then Korgano is like the moon god. So the sun god's like all powerful and, destroys people with heat and thirst and all these things. So Picard becomes Korgano, and they kind of do this play back and forth where he convinces Masaka to rest. In other words, to release its power on the ship. And once that happens, everything goes away and the ship goes back to normal. And they're able to put a code into the computer's program that's like a deactivate code or something like that. Everything goes back to normal, and Data like comes back to himself as well. And they're able to, I don't know what, they put some buoys around this device or whatever, and they alert Starfleet and they say, hey, go check that thing out, but don't get too close because they really messed us up. And Data remembers what happened. And they're talking, and Picard's like, you want to be human. You've actually been a whole civilization. That's something no human can say. Not only that, but you were like, well, actually at the time he says you were at least 12 different personalities or 16 different personalities or something like that you got to experience. And Data's like, oh no, it was way more than that. It was thousands. It was thousands and thousands of people that were inside me. And so I love this episode because he gets to really experience humanity on a level that humanity doesn't even experience. And he got to experience an entire civilization and their culture and their mythos and their values, which I just think is so freaking cool. Like, such a great idea. All right, episode number 4 is, oh wait, I skipped one. Episode number 5 on the list is The Schizoid Man, which is season 2, episode 6. So during this episode, a dying scientist transfers his consciousness to Data so that he can live forever. This story is crazy and it's so good. So the Federation comes upon this one scientist. I think they go to help him with something. And the scientist is in his last days. But he's super, super smart. And he tells Data that he actually taught Noonien Soong everything he knows. So he says, if Noonien Soong is your dad, I'm basically your granddad. I want you to call me Grandpa. So Data's like, okay, Grandpa, which is just so cute. And Grandpa is in love with his young, beautiful assistant. So Grandpa's like, I don't know, 70, 80. And the assistant's like 20. And so he's like, oh, I'm in love with her, but I can never be with her because I'm so old and infirmed. So I created, I spent the last few years of my life creating this technology that can transfer my consciousness into a machine. That way I can live forever, and I can teach her how to use it so she can transfer her consciousness into a machine, and the two of us can live together forever, in happy mechanical bliss. That's his plan. So when Data comes along, he's like, perfect. You're the exact one I was looking for. So when he passes away, he activates his technology to transfer his consciousness to Data. So now he's controlling Data's body. So now he's got super strength and, super speed and super intelligence with his calculations and all of this. And he tells her, I think her name is like Kara or something. He tells her the whole truth. Like, he comes clean to her and he's like, look, it's really me. It's not Data. Like, it's really me, the scientist. And he's like, we can be together forever. Join me. And he like grabs her hand to say, you got to be with me forever. And he actually breaks several of her bones because he forgot he's super strong. So she's like, no, I don't want to live forever. And I don't want to live in a robot. And yeah, I had feelings for you too, but like, that's kind of over now because you kind of passed away last week. You know what I mean? So she rejects him, which of course makes him furious. So now he goes on a rampage. So he's running through the ship, breaking stuff, and he's in engineering, tossing guards left and right. And Picard comes to talk to him and is just like, look, dude, look at how you're hurting everyone you love. You cannot take over Data's body. You need to get out of his body and you need to go. Like, you need to let go of this life. It's over. So he knocks Picard unconscious. He's just like, whatever, I'm going to do what I want. But when Picard wakes up or comes back to consciousness, they discover that Data is back to himself. The scientist did really think about what Picard said, I guess, and thought about what the young assistant said as well, and was like, yeah, this is wrong. Like, and I'm also taking Data's body over against his will. That's not cool either. So he leaves, but before he goes, he transfers all of his knowledge into the Enterprise ship's computer. So all of his research, all of his knowledge, everything he hasn't yet shared with his assistant is there, but the humanness, like his consciousness or whatever, is nowhere to be found. Such an interesting episode. Now, this episode, The Schizoid Man, is not technically about Data at all. It's really about Data's grandpa. But I just think it's such an interesting idea. I always like these ideas when there's kind of like a body swap and someone finds themselves in a new body and it's like, what do I do now? How do I act? How do I behave? And do I pretend to be the old body? Do I tell people that I'm really somebody else? I just think that's such an interesting concept. And also the thought of a consciousness being in a computer, because he did have the option of staying in the Enterprise computer and taking over the entire ship. And the ship could have been his body, but he didn't go that direction. Would have been another really cool episode though. Okay, episode number 4 on the list is Data Lore. And Data Lore is season 1, episode 13. And in Data Lore, the Enterprise finds themselves back on Omicron Theta, which is the planet where Data was first found and activated. So Data's there, I think Geordi's there, and one other person, maybe Riker or something. I don't remember who else is there. But anyways, they go down to the planet, and the planet is just, there's no living things on the planet, not even bacteria in the soil. There's nothing on the planet because the planet had been attacked by the crystalline entity. And the crystalline entity is like this giant killer snowflake in space that absorbs all biological life, like everything, leaves, grass, like I said, bacteria from the soil, everything, humans, aliens, everything. Maybe not androids, but everything else. So when Data was found, there was nothing else around him, just him sitting on like this plinth or this stone table. So they find Soong's lab / home, maybe. But they find the lab and they go in and they find this dismantled android. So Data's like, oh my gosh, there's another android. We should put it together and see if it can come back to life, or like, was this a prototype? Like, what is this? So they take it back to the Enterprise. They put it together. I think Geordi and Beverly both work on it because it's part machine, part human, because it's got the positronic net, which is like humanish or whatever. Anyways, put them together. And then we get Lore, Data's brother. And so it's like, oh my gosh, there's another one of you. So Lore tells Data that Lore tells Data, you were the first version that Soong made. Soong made you and then realized that you were just so inferior and you sucked a lot and everybody hated you. So he made me instead. I don't know why I was dismantled, but that's what happened. Right. So he's sowing. This just goes to show what a little turd Lore is, but he's sowing all these seeds of doubt into Data. And Data's like, oh, I didn't know that. Okay, whatever. Because he has no emotion. So he's like, well, okay, that sounds right to me. But he tells Wesley this, and Wesley's like, that's not right. Like, that's crazy. So Wesley's like not loving Lore. He's thinking Lore is a little bit suspicious, but everyone else is like, yay, Lore. No one else has a problem with this. Data makes the mistake of telling Lore where his off switch is, which is a thing Data does far too often. Lore turns him off, swaps clothes, deactivates him, and, says there's something wrong, and then pretends to be Data. He's like, oh, there's something wrong with Lore. You guys should go help him. And when he pretends to be Data, he contacts the crystalline entity to bring it to the Enterprise to absorb all the living material on the ship. I guess out of revenge. I don't know. But before he switches Data off, he tells Data, I lied about what I said before. I was actually made first, but all of the colonists on Omicron Theta were just so jealous of me that they just couldn't handle my amazingness. And since they couldn't handle me, that's why Soong dismantled me and created you, a much inferior copy that was easier to handle. So before he dismantled me and I knew this was coming, I called the crystalline entity to come get rid of all of the settlers, like in revenge. So it's kind of like a mutual destruction scenario, which worked, right? It totally worked until now. So now, so then he switches Data off. So now we know as the viewers that Lore is bad news. And he was the reason the entire colony was destroyed. Presumably at this point, we don't know any better. We think Soong and his wife was also destroyed. And the only survivors were Data and Lore. And only Lore-ish, because Lore was already dismantled. So anyways, Wesley solves it, comes to save the day, figures out, what happened, turns Data back on. Wesley, Beverly, and Data go to confront Lore, and Data like wrestles with him and airlocks him, like sends him out into space. So him and the crystalline entity are kind of floating away into space. You would think this is the last of Lore, but it's not. We get to see him again and again, which is actually a good thing because I think Lore is such an interesting character and he is the opposite of Data in every way. He is super emotional and his values are totally askew. He only cares about himself and no one else. He's totally self-absorbed. He doesn't care about mass destruction, and he doesn't care who he hurts. So the end of this episode, which I thought was really interesting from Data's perspective, is that the whole time that Data has had awareness of himself, he thought that he was alone in the universe. And now he comes to find out that he's not. There is exactly one other person in the entire universe who's like him. And unfortunately, that person is a psychopath who just tried to destroy him and the entire ship. So it's like, was it better to not know? I don't know, maybe. Which brings me to the next episode on the list, which is episode number 3. And that is Brothers, season 4, episode 3. So in Brothers, Noonien Soong, who is the creator of Data and the creator of Lore, sends out some kind of beacon because he's about to pass away. And he wants to give Data one last gift, which is an emotions chip, so he can finally experience emotions. So the beacon works on Data, but it kind of like scrambles his brain, so he doesn't really know what's going on, and it takes him over. He ends up hijacking the Enterprise, mimicking Picard's voice, putting in all the security codes, locking everybody out, and taking the ship to his father's planet, stranding it in space, and beaming himself down to the planet. Now, when he gets to the planet, and he has no memory of any of these things. This is just like automatic behavior for him. When he gets to the planet, Soong kind of like turns that off and turns back on his normal self. And he's like, whoa, where am I? What's going on? And just as Soong is like, Data, I'm so glad you've come, Lore walks in. And it's like, bum, bum, bum. Because last thing Soong knew was he had dismantled Lore and left him back on Omicron Theta, the same place he left Data. But he knew Data had survived because he'd been hearing about him for years in Starfleet and all of his accomplishments. But he had no idea that Lore was reassembled and like at large. So Lore shows up and is like, Father. And he's understandably extremely resentful because he's like, there's this line he says where he's like, why didn't you fix me? You had it in the power to fix me, but instead you threw me away and made another one, which is like, ugh, if you're the older sibling, I feel like that really could hit home. You know what I mean? Where it's like, why'd you make another one when perfection has been reached? I have a couple siblings. So it's like, I feel like my sister had that sentiment towards me when I was born. It was like, who is this? What is this creature? I was already here. And now there's this other thing. Why did we even need that? So anyways, typical big brother. So Noonien Soong is like, Lord, had I known you were alive and well and roaming the galaxy, I would have come up with a final gift for you as well. But I didn't know. So I only made a gift for Data. But you know what? I'm going to take a nap. And then when I wake up, I'll give Data his gift, which was a mistake. So of course, Lore hits that famous off switch, turns Data off, pretends to be Data, steals Data's emotions chip, ransacks the place, attacks Soong, and then disappears. By now, the crew of the Enterprise has figured out how to unlock some of Data's commands, and they can beam down to the surface at least. They can't fly away or control the ship, but they can do that. So an away team beams down, and they find Data, they turn him back on, and they see Soong is like holding on to his last breath. And he tells Data, first of all, he unlocks his memory so he can know what the heck he did when he was on the Enterprise. But also he tells Data, I'm so sorry, your emotions chip was stolen by your brother. I don't have a second one. But this is a gift I want to give you, and I wish you all the best. And Data's like, I wish I could grieve for you. I'm sorry. Like, I wish I could feel sad about your passing. And Soong is like, you're going to grieve in your own way. Don't worry about it. Which I just love. I love how he knows his son and accepts him the way he is. I don't know how much he accepts Lore the way he is, but Lore's a psycho. So I don't know. That's a different conversation that we never really got into. But this, again, why I like this episode is because I feel like it's very human. One of Data's biggest ambitions is to be more human, right? And is there anything less human or is there anything more human than family drama, right? Than drama with your brother, drama with your dad, and drama with acceptance and where you are in the hierarchy and why can't I have what my brother has and all of that stuff. I feel like that was very human. So even though he couldn't feel the emotions, the entire scenario was just as human as it gets. And it ultimately leads to the next episode on my list, which is episode number 2, Descent, parts 1 and 2. Descent part 1 is season 6, episode 26, and Descent part 2 is season 7, episode 1. And in these 2 episodes, Lore, again, it's Lore, he is on a planet of Borg drones who have been disconnected from the Hive. And what happened was, way back in the episode I, Borg, Picard and crew had discovered this Borg that was no longer attached to the collective named Hugh. So Hugh had he was developing independence, like independent thought and individuality. So they fixed him up, but then they sent him back to the Borg collective. Or I can't say fixed him up because he's still Borg, but they allowed him to have understanding of his own individuality, and they sent him back to the collective. But I guess that individuality spread like a virus to the other members of his cube or sphere or whatever shaped ship he was on. And they all got disconnected from the hive, but they also got disconnected from each other. So they crashed on this ship, or they crashed on this planet, and they didn't even know how to function. Like, they were starving to death because they didn't have any orders from the hive mind telling them to eat or when to sleep or when to drink water or any of those things. So many of them did not make it. But the handful that was left needed guidance, and Lore provided that guidance. And he told them that you guys had it half right, because Borg are all about perfection. And so they're always assimilating biological and technological distinctiveness to create their own versions of perfection. Well, Lore says, no, the real perfection is me, an android. You need no biological, you need only artificial, you need only mechanical, you need only technological in order to achieve perfection. And I can tell you exactly how to become an android like me, which was false, but that was the promise. So then the Borg colony gets split in two, the half that follows Lore and the half that lives in underground caves hiding from Lore, I guess. So anyways, Lore has this big ruse where he tricks Data into coming on board with him, and then he controls him with like all these technological things. He mind controls Data. He gives him emotions using his emotions chip, but he very carefully decides which emotions to give him, like anger when they need to fight, or like whatever. Like, he's very still controlling and super manipulative. So Data is completely seduced by this rush of emotions, and he's like, Lore, I will do anything you want. So he's like, great, I want you to kidnap and torture these people. So he starts torturing Geordi, like day after day. He starts torturing his best friend without any remorse, and he actually starts to enjoy it. So he becomes just as crazy and unstable as Lore, because Lore is pulling his strings. Well, fast forward, and Picard and Troy and Geordi figure out a way to kind of reboot Data. And they enact the plan. Data's rebooted, but it's going to take a while before his system kind of reset. So Data's going about his day, and Lore's like, now it's time for the final, best moment. We're going to bring out Picard, and you're going to shoot him with a phaser. And he's like, wait, what? That doesn't sound right. But 10 minutes ago, he would have been like, woohoo. But now that the reset is working, he's like, that doesn't sound like something I would actually want to do. So Lore is like, what's wrong with you? Are you turning on me? And anyways, as they're kind of arguing about this, Hugh breaks in with all of his underground Borgs, and then it's like a Borg civil war. It's like Borg on Borg, and they're all fighting. And then Riker and his band that escaped under the tunnels and caves, they start shooting. And then Picard and Troy and Geordi are trying to get out of the way. And Lore and Data go to some other room while the fighting is going on. And Data's like, listen, Lore, I can't allow you to continue. So he pulls a phaser on him. He's like, it's basically like a Kivas Fajo moment again. He's like, I just can't let you continue. I have to stop you. I'm not going to destroy you, but I have to stop you. And Laura's like, I'd like to see you try. And so they kind of, both whip out their phasers, but Data's a little bit faster. And Lore kills over. And as he's powering down, he says to Data, I love you, brother. And he shuts down. And you're like, ooh, if that's love, I don't want to see hate, because his version of love is awful. Well, anyways, Data dismantles him and is like, we have to keep him dismantled for good. He is too dangerous to put back together. But he's also my brother, and the only other Soong-Type robot or Soong-Type Android that we know of in the galaxy. So we have to keep him. We can't destroy him, but we can't let him roam free. So I guess he goes to storage somewhere. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what happens to him. And Lore never comes back, which would be such an interesting, I feel like Lore is somebody who should have come back in Picard rather than some of the other choices that were made. But anyways, so the reason why I picked this is because you get to see Data making hard choices for the greater good. And again, is there anything more human than having these kinds of philosophical debates? Now, Lore's bad news, and he needs to be stopped, like the end, period, the end. But also, you can't destroy him because he's your brother, So there's just so many layers, which is why I really love this episode. And it brings me down to episode number 1, my top most favorite episode starring Data from Star Trek The Next Generation. And that is The Offspring, season 3, episode 16. Now, in this episode, Data creates a daughter. Data creates a child. And it's just such a great episode. It's more about the child. It's more about Lal, his daughter, than it is about Data. But it's also about their connection as a family, which is really beautiful. I think my favorite Data episodes, almost all of them have to do with family, right? His grandpa, his brother, his dad. I didn't put the episode with his mom because I don't like that episode. But there's another, case where it's Data and family. So in this episode, Data creates Lol and is so proud to show Wesley and Troy and Geordi his daughter, like, this is Lol, and isn't this exciting? And Picard is like, I'm sorry, what? Data did what? And Picard's horrified, and he's like, Data, how could you do this without asking permission or without telling me? And Data's like, I don't see the other members of the crew asking permission and telling you before they have children, so I don't understand why it's different for me. Is it because I'm artificial or like what? And Picard doesn't want to come out and say that's exactly why. So he's like, no, I mean, I just wish I would have known. That's all. Please let me know before you do something like this again. Right. So that's what he leaves it as, until Admiral Halftail from Starfleet comes along and pulls a Maddox. Right. He shows up and he's like, Lol is another Soong-Type Android, and I want to study her. I want to study how she works, how to Data create her. I want to kind of, not pick her apart, but I want to keep her in sterile lab conditions and test her abilities and all these different things. And Picard is like, no, that's Data's daughter. You can't just snatch his daughter away. And he even says this phrase where he says the umbilical cord is still there. Like, it hasn't even been cut yet. She's been in existence for all of like 3 days at this point. No, it's not time. It is not time yet. But Admiral Halftail tries to convince Data that this is the right thing to do as a father. And if he considers himself to be a good father, he's going to do what's best for Lol, and he's going to ship her off to Starfleet so Admiral Halftail can deal with her. And Data's just like, but that's not what parents do, right? They don't ship off their kids the second that they're born to go be studied. And Admiral Halftail is like, well, I'm a parent, and I know how, you have to make the hard choices. And Picard's not a parent, so don't listen to what he's saying about it's too soon and all of that. But Picard is just like, they come across this thing where they're like, we haven't even asked her what she wants. And Picard's like, why don't we do that? Why don't we ask her what she wants? Because she is, she has rights, certain rights. I know what those are because I helped fight for them. So if she chooses to go with you, that's fine. But if she doesn't choose to go with you, then she stays. And Admiral Halftail is like, Data, you have to convince her to go because that's going to be best for her. And Picard's like, let her make up her own mind. Anyways, they corner Lol later on, bring her into the observation lounge. And Admiral Halftail is like, you need to come with me. I want to take you away to, he doesn't say study you, but to help you grow and all these things. What do you say? And she's like, no, I want to stay here on the Enterprise. And he's like, come on, this is going to be better for you. And she's like, well, once I've learned absolutely everything there is to learn on the Enterprise, then I'll go with you. And he's like, no, I command you. I'm ordering you. You have to come with me, whatever. So she stumbles out of the room, and she's so distraught that she actually feels her first emotion. And the emotion is terror. She goes over to Troy and she's like, I don't know what to do. And she's freaking out. And Troy's like, she can sense the fear in her. And she's like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And then she comes over to Data. She's like, something's wrong with Lol. Get to your lab immediately. And basically that fear triggered a cascade failure in her positronic net, caused her entire body to shut down, and caused her to go offline. Now, while Halftail did help Data try to prevent the cascade failure and try to save her, he couldn't. It was just the technology was too far advanced and there was nothing they could do. So he seemed really sad about it. And he told Troy, Geordi, and Wesley, who were waiting outside of the lab, just like they were in the beginning, he told them, hey, I'm so sorry that she's not going to make it, but we tried our best. And he leaves kind of sad, which always makes me mad because he was responsible for that. And he's sad about what he did. But anyways, he ends up leaving, and Data ends up saying goodbye to Lol. And with her last breath, she says, I love you, Father. And he says, I wish I could say the same to you, but I don't have emotions, so I can't say I love you. And she's like, don't worry, I'll feel it enough for the both of us, which is my favorite line from that episode. And then it goes off. So that is, my top favorite episode about Data. Hello. Welcome. Everybody's joining in live. Everyone who is in on the replay. Okay, I do have some honorable mentions. So that was my top 10 list. And just to go over the top 10 episodes that I thought were amazing Data episodes. Number 10, The Measure of a Man. Number 9, Quality of Life. Number 8, The Most Toys. Number 7, Redemption Part 2. Number 6, Masks. Number 5, The Schizoid Man. Number 4, Data Lore. Number 3, Brothers. Number 2, Descent Part 1 and 2. So it's kind of like 2 episodes, but it's a 2-parter, so I'm going to call it 1 episode. And then number 1, The Offspring. Now for the honorable mentions. So I have 3 of those. The first honorable mention episode with Data is Time's Arrow. And specifically Time's Arrow Part 2. because that's where we see Data going around through 18th century San Francisco, I think he's at, and he's trying to like figure out a way to time travel back home. So I really like that episode because it shows his kind of versatility and his ability to blend in. Him who seems like the least able to blend into anything anywhere. So love that episode. The second honorable mention goes to Thine Own Self. Oh, sorry. Time's Arrow is season 6, episode 1. That's Time's Arrow part 2. Thine Own Self is season 7, episode 16. In that episode, Data is going, I forget why he's going here, but he goes to some pre-warp planet and his shuttle crashes and he gets amnesia. And he ends up walking to this nearby colony and he doesn't know who he is or what he is. And he brings with him something like a case with some radioactive material. And the blacksmith gets a hold of it and starts making jewelry out of it for everybody in the town. And it's beautiful jewelry. It's actually not beautiful. It's just like really crude chunks. But it's supposed to be beautiful jewelry that he's making for everyone. But it's giving everyone radiation sickness. So Data figures out using this old-timey technology, like medieval technology, how to discover that it's radiation poisoning and he figures out how to cure it. And he's able to cure it just as the entire town turns on him, like Frankenstein's monster, and blasts him with something or hits him with rocks or something. They deactivate him and they bury him. So the Enterprise actually comes later on incognito and they beam his body out from the dirt and they reactivate him or whatever. And then he gets his memory back. But that's a really good episode. And it's like, what would Data be like if he wasn't Data? You know, what would he be like if he didn't know he was an android? If he didn't know about Soong, if he didn't know he was the only one in the universe, what would he be like? And I feel like this episode, probably more than any other episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, shows Data as a human because he really thinks he is. Or, you know, like a humanoid alien, which I think is so cool. Okay. And then they hit him with a spear. Oh, that might be right. A spear. Yeah, that makes more sense because I don't think they had any phasers. They didn't have that technology. But it was just awful. Like it was just awful. Okay. And then the other honorable mention goes to 2 episodes that are connected. The first is Elementary Dear Data, which is season 2, episode 3. And the second is Ship in a Bottle, which is season 6, episode 12. And both of those episodes involve a sentient hologram of James Moriarty from the Sherlock Holmes short stories. Actually, Moriarty was only in one short story. But anyways, from the Sherlock Holmes world. And Moriarty takes over the ship in both episodes. And in the second episode, they're able to kind of outsmart him and trick him into thinking that he's escaped the ship, but really he's in a program inside of a program in a cube. And he gets to live out the rest of his life with the woman he loves, which is beautiful. But I love these episodes because the first one just shows Data's love of Sherlock Holmes, which I also love Sherlock Holmes. So that feels like kindred connection there. And the second one, we get to see everything that they're trying to do to figure out how to give this sentient hologram freedom. And I think it's less about Data and it's more about Reg in that episode. And overall, it's more about Moriarty. But the reason why I put it as an honorable mention is because Data is the reason why we have a sentient hologram, because Pulaski said, oh, you're playing out a Sherlock Holmes story that you already know. You need to make it more unbeatable, and kind of challenges Data. So then Data, or actually I think it was Geordi who says, make a Moriarty that can actually beat Data. And that's how you become sentient, which is such a cool idea. Like a sentient hologram, which is what we get to experience in Voyager. I just love that idea. So that gets an honorable mention. So that is the top 10 list of best episodes starring Data from Star Trek The Next Generation. And those are my 3 honorable mentions. So I'm going to check the chat and then wrap it up. So see. Hello, Monty TJDK. Maybe there's a way to say that. Let me know how to say that in the chat. Hello, PS2 Cypher. I thought it was neat to show how powerful the ship's computer is. Which episode are you talking about? I will say the ship's computer is super cool, and they kind of take it to another level in Voyager where they're like, oh, it has bioneural circuitry and it can do even more. But it still sounds like Majel Barrett, which I love. And I kind of wanted to see, do you remember that episode of TNG where the ship becomes, I want to say the ship becomes sentient, but it creates a little baby inside of a cargo bay. Do you remember that? And the baby looks like 90s silly straws. So it gets sentience because of all the input it's getting or something. And then it creates like this little baby sentient thing, and then the thing like blasts out of the ship and flies away. Um, yeah, like I felt like, well, one, that episode's bizarre. Don't watch it. It's so dumb. But I do feel like the ship should become sentient at some point with so much data. If the exocomps could become sentient, why can't the ship become sentient? And then they take it further in Discovery, where they do have like a sentient ship. They have an AI that runs the ship, and the AI is just kind of like, um, at one point the AI is like, "Nah, I'm not gonna follow those orders." And they're just like, "You have to follow the orders," and she's like, "I really don't, though. I'm not going to." Which I think is like that is an interesting plot point that should happen. But at the end, she's just like, "Okay, I agree." So they kind of don't push that as far as it can go. But I feel like that's the logical next step. Okay, so yeah, the ship's computer is powerful enough to create a sentient hologram, which is interesting because could we have the ship create another data? Like, why not? I don't see why not. Um, yeah, Jordy's girlfriend, Jordy's love interest was Dr. Leah Brahms, who he made a holographic version of this doctor and then fell in love with the hologram and then met the real doctor. And the doctor was super pissed to find out that he'd been hooking up with a holographic version of her, which I understand because I'd be super pissed too. But Jordy continues to try to seduce her, only for her to say, I don't know how you got so much information about me from the ship, but the thing you missed was that I'm married. And he was like, oh, so let's just be buddies. And that's kind of the story of Jordy's life. I'm going to do I'm going to do a live stream all about the best Jordy episodes, but man, he is unlucky in love. However, in All Good Things, we discover that he's married with kids. So eventually it works out. And then he does show back up in Picard where he is married with kids. So eventually it works out. He does find his one, but it takes a minute. Yeah, I think that's it. That is it for me. That's all I see in the chat. So thank you so much for joining live. Thank you so much for joining on the replay. Join me every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern for a live stream chat all about Star Trek. So in the meantime, goodbye, live long and prosper.